All right, we are here. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you for coming to tonight's event with Cindy Baldwin and Cory Leonardo. My name is Jenny. I am one of the co-owners of Mysterious Galaxy. I am here to briefly introduce our authors and make sure everybody knows what's what on Crowdcast. And then I will be exiting, quickly, not followed by a bear, and let them do their thing. This is fingers crossed. For those of you who have joined us before, thank you for returning. You know the ropes. For those of you who are new, welcome, welcome, welcome. You can see the comments section on the right-hand side of your screen. I don't know if I'm actually pointing to the right-hand side of your screen, but it is there, I promise. Feel free to share any love or excitement or any just general merriment that you would like our authors to see. Share that in the comments below my screen, or your screen, and our wonderful faces. You will see a green button that says books. That is where you can go to order a signed and personalized book plate from Cindy. And that's awesome and fun and great. And we are still kind of living in the mid-post Corona world, and that is a wonderful opportunity to have. So that is where you would find all of that. And you can also find Cory's books as well. If you have any questions for our authors, which we hope you have plenty, you can share those using the Ask a Question button. You just click it, type your question in, and it will be there awaiting them when the time comes. If you do go in there and you see, dang, somebody already asked my question, you can feel free to upvote that question. It'll move it to the top of the list. So if there's any really burning questions you have that you really want to hear answered, make sure to vote for them so that they can kind of get priority. Now, our beautiful authors, I will give a short introduction. Cindy Baldwin is the author of the critically acclaimed novel Where the Watermelons Grow, Beginner's Welcome, and The Stars of Whistling Ridge. She lives just outside of Portland, Oregon with her husband and daughter. And today we are celebrating the aforementioned The Stars of Whistling Ridge. Joining her is Cory Leonardo, who grew up believing she'd replace Vanna White on Wheel of Fortune. But when that didn't pan out, she decided to turn letters and phrases in a different way. Her first novel, The Simple Art of Flying, published in North America and titled Call Me Alastair in the UK, has been awarded a Parents' Choice Silver Medal. The Hedgehog of Oz, her second novel, which came out recently, which I'm excited about. I'm a huge Wizard of Oz fan, as we were talking about a little bit before, is her second novel, and which came out just recently. And I know I'm repeating myself now, and I apologize, but that is my signal that I probably should exit and leave it to our beautiful authors. Ladies, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny.
Hi, everybody. We're so excited to be here. And I'm so excited to be with my friend Cindy today. I don't know if you guys know, but we've been friends for a little bit now, but I think this is only like the second time we've actually talked face to face.
I know, it's kind of amazing.
There's been a lot of emails back and forth and a lot of DMs and things like that, but it's rare that we get to talk face to face. So this is pretty exciting for me, at least. To celebrate my friend Cindy and her amazing writing and her book. I just thought, I don't know if everyone here has read the book yet. I've read it twice now, and I'll probably go in for a third. So I'm not sure anyone has had the chance yet to read, but Cindy, would you mind telling us a little bit about your third and most awesome book?
Yeah, so The Stars of Whistling Ridge is my third book. And this is like the most, everyone always asks, like, what's your favorite book that you've written? And I can't choose a favorite book, but this is the most fun book that I've written. It was the most one that was the most purely enjoyable during the writing process. And it's about a girl named Ivy who is almost 13 and has lived in an RV for her whole life because her mama is a fallen star and it's her job to travel around and tend to the magic that undergirds the world. But as she, gets closer to being a teenager, Ivy is feeling less and less happy with her life and less satisfied. And she feels like she really needs a place where she can put down roots and where she can find a forever home that's a place where she can be happy. And so one night she kind of unwisely decides to steal all of the wishes that her mama barters and use them to wish for a forever home. And in doing so, she breaks all the rules of wishing and ends up unleashing a bunch of disasters on her family that she then has to try to kind of help patch back up. So it's a story that I love, and I am really excited to have it out.
I loved it too, and I know everyone here is going to love it when they do read it. I read it again this past week and was completely immersed once more and in awe of your writing. So without further ado, would you mind, I know you'd like to read a little bit for us,
Yeah.
And my favorite is always story time, so.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you for reminding me. Yeah, so I am going to read a little bit from the beginning of the book tonight. So if anyone was at my launch a couple days ago, this is a different section. So I figured I would switch it up. So this is from chapter 1. In stories, the number 3 is important. 3 princesses, 3 woodcutters' sons, 3 tasks. My story is the same, I guess. 3 sisters, 3 fallen stars, and 3 disasters. Mama always says that disasters are like blessings. Both of them come in 3s. They follow on each other's heels the way starlight follows moonrise, so that you can't untangle them even if you tried. This is the story of how I proved her right. Everywhere we travel, word about the wishes gets around. You'd think that for a family who lives on the road 100% of the time, we'd have to advertise, but somehow we just show up to a town, park our Winnebago, we call her Martha, and by that night, we've already had at least one knock on the door. They're all different, the wish seekers. Sometimes it will be a young mother with tired eyes. Others, a granddaddy with a cane and a tightness around the mouth. Every now and then, it'll be a teenager shifting from one foot to the other on the RV front steps like his shoes are full of fire ants. But they all want the same things: happiness, peace, resolution. And while Mama never barters a wish without first cautioning about how wishes have limits and rules and don't always work out the way you expect them to, the wish seekers always leave with a lighter step, like the world is finally turning their way. Sometimes we see them again. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes their wishes work out for the best. Sometimes they don't. But no matter where we go, they find us. The evening we pulled up in Silverwood, Oklahoma, the visit came from a grandmotherly lady with short blonde hair and a way of holding herself that made me think of the Queen of England. She wore a navy skirt and blazer without a speck of dust on them, the kind of outfit you can only get away with if you had a regular house with a regular closet, a laundry room, and a full-size ironing board. We'd been wandering our way north from where we'd stayed in the Louisiana Bayou country, where Mama had spent a whole week trying to calm a wellspring of swamp magic that was pouring enchantment into the water and creating some very unusual alligators. When we'd packed up our things and gotten back on the road, Daddy had asked where to go next, and Mama had pointed to a map. Even though none of us had ever heard of Silverwood before, Mama was never wrong about that kind of thing. And once we reached Silverwood, we had barely plugged Martha's cord into the campsite's adapter before the stranger showed up. There was no actual knock on the door this time, on account of the fact that we were all already outside. Daddy and Sophie were down at the lake fishing for our dinner. Elena and I were putting a tablecloth and dishes on the campsite picnic table, and Mama was crouched by the fire pit, laying logs with more precision than most people build houses. The visitor paused at the edge of our campsite, her feet together in their tan pumps, and cleared her throat. "Hello," Mama said, standing up and wiping char from her hands. Her hair swished and sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Mama's hair was long and white, not stringy and white like an old lady's, and not white like people say when they're describing hair that's so light blonde it's nearly see-through. Mama's was bone white, star white, milk white, shot through with glimmers of silver, so that sometimes when she moved, it looked almost like water. Everywhere we went, people stopped to stare at Mama, at her golden brown skin and white hair and eyes the clear gray blue of moonlight on snow. Nobody in the world looked quite like my Mama and her sisters, Aunt Agatha and Aunt Ruth. "Can I help you?" Mama asked, lifting a hand to shake the visitors. "I'm Marianne Bloom. These are my daughters, Ivy and Elena." Beside me, Elena shrank into herself, her shoulders curling in and her arms folding across her chest. Elena sometimes reminded me of a mouse, bright and cheerful and energetic when she was alone or with people she trusted, but trembling and quiet around strangers. Sometimes it got so bad she could hardly talk when people we didn't know asked her a question. The navy blazer lady only darted nervous eyes at us and then looked back at Mama, like she didn't want to say whatever it was she had come where we and Elena could hear her. They were often like that, the wish seekers, carrying their secrets in tight fingers. "Ivy, honey, come here and get this fire going while I take our guest inside a minute," Mama said. And even though curiosity burned through me hotter than any campfire, I obeyed. The regal lady followed Mama into the RV. Martha's door swinging shut behind them with a bang. For as long as anybody could remember, people had been wishing on falling stars, and over time, those wishes had grown heavy and solid and real enough to weight down tiny pieces of that stardust and give them hearts that beat and wings that could carry them through the warm night air. Because fireflies had come from stars once, it didn't take much for a fallen star woman to breathe wishes back into them, reminding the fireflies where they'd come from and how they'd come to be. All you had to do after that was whisper your wish as you released the firefly, and as it drifted up into the darkness, it would take your wish with it, wrapping that wish up in its glowing golden magic. That's all for now.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And as you can tell, I have a dress that has fireflies and stars on it. So one of my friends actually made this for me. It's pretty awesome.
If you guys didn't know, Cindy always matches her books. And
yep. I sort of started it by accident with my first book, but now I feel like it's like my brand, and I get a lot of joy out of doing it.
Definitely. I tried, I think, with my first book. I wore cherries. But the second one, I don't know, hedgehog. There's not a lot of hedgehog wear.
I think it's harder with animals. There's just not as many things about animals. I don't know. You could dress up like a movie. What they call them? A concession.
Popcorn earrings or something.
That's right. Popcorn earrings.
Well, I have a list of questions, and friends, if you want to ask questions or if there's something I haven't asked in the course of this, there's that little ask the question button at the bottom, and we'll get to those at the end. But I have a list of questions because, like I said, Cindy is one of my favorite writers, but she's also brilliant, and I know this from experience. She was my Pitch Wars mentor once upon a time and basically taught me how to edit a book. And so her knowledge it's beyond. So without, let's get right into it. Can we talk about like background behind the scenes? So where did this story come from, and where do a lot of your stories start? Do you start with setting, or do you start with your characters or a plot?
I usually start with like some nugget of inspiration. And I love, whenever I do school events, kids are always like, where do you get your ideas? And I love answering this question because all of my ideas come from really weird places. Like all of my ideas have been very kind of like incidental, random things that have happened. And I firmly believe that the skills that you cultivate are the skills that you get better at. And so I make a habit of I used to actually keep a tiny notebook in my purse, and these days I keep it on my phone. But I make a habit of keeping a list of any kind of story ideas, like any little nuggets of inspiration that come to me kind of while I'm out and going around in my regular life. But this story I think has like the best, weirdest origin story ever, because this whole book was inspired by an autocorrect on my phone. And I know, right? So a couple of years ago, I was trying to Google something that had to do with the book Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, which is one of my favorite books. And I was Googling Little Women on my phone, and I was using my little swipe typing, and I tried typing in Little Women, and instead what autocorrect spit out was Little Winnebago. And if you don't know, a Winnebago is a type of RV camper. And it was one of those moments where I just was like, this is absurd. Like, why would my phone ever think that I was trying to type Winnebago instead of women? Like, supposedly phone autocorrects function on, what's more commonly typed. And I promise you one of those is more common than the other, and it's not Winnebago. But I also found it kind of charming, like the phrase Little Winnebago. And I was like, I would read a book called The Little Winnebago. And so I started like wondering, what would a book that was called The Little Winnebago be about? Obviously it would be about an RV. And so I started wondering what are some reasons that somebody might live in an RV for their whole life? And of course I'm thinking, in a middle grade lens, because that's what I love writing. And so, in a middle grade story, why would somebody have lived on the road in a Winnebago their whole life? And I kind of had this idea of women who are fallen stars, who fall as stars and wake as women, and then it's their job to kind of tend to the magic that weaves under the world. And this, you know, character's mom would have to keep moving because she would need to tend to the magic all over, you know, all over her region. And so that was kind of like where the story idea initially came from. And the first title, as Cory, you probably remember, like the first title of the story was The Little Winnebago. And then I did some market research on Facebook, which is, you know, what I often do for my titles. And literally every person who had a child in the age ranges of like 10 to 14 said that their kid did not know what a Winnebago was and would not pick up a book with that in the title. So, and I felt like it could be more evocative anyway. And so The Stars of Whistling Ridge was the title that kind of grew up to replace that.
That is amazing. I think that is the best origin story I have ever heard. I'm going to start looking at my autocorrects a little more closely from now on and hoping and wishing. You just never know, right? So Ivy's notebook, you just mentioned that you have carried a notebook. Did you do that as a kid? Did that come from, you know, past experience?
That's kind of yes and no. So in the book, Ivy has a notebook that Ivy wants to be a writer. And so she carries this notebook around and writes down her stories in it, and also things she thinks of or words that she likes. That idea, I had lots of notebooks as a kid. I wasn't quite as organized as Ivy, where she kind of has like one notebook that she carries, you know, and then she goes to another notebook. I was more like I had a billion notebooks, and it was you know, anyone's guess if I found the right notebook. But I did have lots of notebooks, and I often would, you know, start stories and kind of put all of my brain dump in there. I also was a big journaler. From the time that I was about 10, I kept a pretty regular journal. And so I was often putting thoughts in there. And then, like I mentioned, as an adult, I have carried notebooks, but actually part of the idea for Ivy's notebook and all the ways that she uses it was because with my second book, Beginner's Welcome, I had, with each book, I find, you know, some books I have a really easy time accessing the voice of the main character. With some books, it's harder. And Beginner's Welcome was one where I had a harder time accessing that. I had to do more drafts before I felt like I had really nailed the main character's voice. And after my first draft, I had sent it to my agent, and she had responded and said, you know, this is beautiful. I love it. But I feel like some of the vocabulary words that this character uses are inconsistent with her character, and she wouldn't be using these words, and middle grade readers aren't really going to understand what they mean. And so can you go through and kind of look for the $10 words that wouldn't fit a middle grade audience? And so I did that. And I just, with every revision, I felt like I was having to like take more inappropriate words back out, like they were, you know, too complex for this character. And I love words, and I like vocabulary, and I like using cool words. And so while I was doing that, I was like, my next book is going to be about a kid who's a writer, and they're going to like words, and they're going to have a collection of words so that I can use whatever word I want to, and I can get away with it, and it can be completely, you know, contextually fitting in the story. And so that's where I came up with the idea of this word list that Ivy takes note, and she shares the definitions of all these words in her notebook, because that was like basically just, I wanted carte blanche to like use whatever vocabulary I felt fit the moment. So.
And that's why we're friends, because my first book, I wanted to use whatever words I wanted to use, and I just made notations at the bottom of the page.
Exactly.
The definition, and you're all good.
Beautifully. It's wonderfully. It's one of my favorites.
So I have to know, do you have a favorite word? Because a lot of the words that you did use in Ivy's notebook were some of my favorite words.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, I was just going to say mellifluous is definitely a favorite. A lot of the ones that are in Ivy's notebooks are favorites of mine. There's a couple of words that I feel like I've carried around for a lot of my life that I just love. Like I love the word spelunking. I don't actually care about spelunking as a hobby, but I love the word spelunking. I think it sounds so cool and weird. And veranda. I've always thought, you know, a veranda was so much more romantic than a porch. And
veranda with wisteria.
Yes, exactly. Especially if it's got a wisteria veranda there. Yeah. So I love words that, another one is susurration. That's another really good one.
Oh, good one. Any hated words?
You know,
Like,
I don't really have words that I like have such a knee-jerk reaction to. I have no problem with the word moist, I'm sorry to say, you know.
Me either. Barnacle is mine, just because I hate barnacles. They're so gross. So it just
super gross. I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. I have to think now. I feel like I haven't spent as much time thinking about hated words. I'll have to notice if I can cross any.
Another thing I have to know, and this is another fun question, is there is the scene where Ivy steals the magic jars, and I seem to remember you commenting in the past. I don't know if it was Twitter or Facebook about how you had to do a little bit of research carrying jars. So I want to hear a little bit about that story. And I also want to know what is the weirdest thing you've ever had to do for book research? In the scene where Ivy steals the wishes, she takes 9 wishes, and I say that they're in quart mason jars and that she puts them into her backpack. And I hadn't really thought twice about that until I got to my very last proofreading stage. And I was reading it out loud to my daughter, and I was like, 9 mason jars like in a backpack seems like a lot, and seems, you know, so I started wondering, like, are they going to actually fit in there? Is it going to be really heavy? And so I actually got my daughter's backpack, and which, you know, standard like school sized backpack like Ivy would have, and I actually took 9 quart sized mason jars and put them in the backpack, and they actually totally fit. Like, I was very surprised. It really was roomy. I probably could have stuck another jar in there. And it wasn't too heavy. I mean, it was as heavy as you would imagine, like with 9 glass jars in there, but not, you know, hugely heavy compared to school books or stuff that you might actually have in a backpack. So yeah, that was definitely a weird thing. My daughter, who's 8, came in and was like, "What are you doing? What are you putting in my backpack?" So at least you were prepared. If your copy editor ever came in and said, "I don't know if that could happen," you had proven it right already.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I knew that it was possible. So yeah, that's one of the weirdest things I've ever done for book research, for sure. This wasn't for research, but I think one of the strangest things that I've ever done for anything involving books was buying a seedless watermelon and buying a packet of watermelon seeds and putting these seeds into the seedless watermelon, which I did for Where the Watermelons Grow, because I wanted to make a book trailer. And if you've read Where the Watermelons Grow, any of you, you know that the seeds in a watermelon is an important part of a scene in Where the Watermelons Grow. And so I wanted to recreate that scene in the book trailer, but it was like May and there were no seeded watermelons. Like, seeded watermelons aren't sold in my area until later in the year. And so yeah, I went and I bought a seedless watermelon, and then I just like bought a packet of watermelon seeds like you would plant, and I just like slotted them in, and I was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever done, but okay. And it actually worked great. Like, I was afraid that you would be able to tell somehow that it was like an imposter, but it looked totally like a seeded watermelon.
That's awesome. One of the many jobs of a children's book author that you don't see behind the scenes. This is why books only come out every 1 or 2 years, is because we're busy putting seeds in watermelons,
right?
Carrying jars for research.
Absolutely.
Or in my case, taking pictures of stuffed animals in the middle of a city street. You just never know where we're going to be.
Yep, exactly.
Although I do have to say, one of the weirdest things that I ever did was, and don't tell anybody this is a secret, I actually trespassed. I went into an abandoned insane asylum here in New York and took pictures and yeah, it was creepy.
Wow, that does sound
weird.
Kind of exciting. So you and Ivy have a lot in common then in trespassing in old creepy buildings.
Yes, exactly. I love it. All right, let's get into some writing talk, because this is I want to hear. This is stuff I want to hear. I want tips. If you've read any of Cindy's books, you know that her command of the English language is amazing. Her settings are absolutely real and more beautiful in writing than they can be in prose sometimes. She's a marvel at that. Your descriptive writing, all of it, does it come naturally, or is it something that you work on? Like, how are your first drafts and compared to later drafts? Do you do any sort of descriptive writing edits along the way, or is it kind of just fall out?
Those are great questions. I don't really feel like as an author, I totally believe in the whole idea of things coming naturally, because I would say in a lot of ways, descriptive writing comes naturally to me, but that's because it's something that I've been interested in for literally as long as I can remember. Like, I can remember being a kid and loving the way that things were described. And like, I have read back through some of the, books, like 20-page books that I wrote when I was 11 and 12, and they're like 75% descriptions of people's ball gowns. And so, I mean, that was something that even then, like, I really was interested in the way that things looked in books and in how to convey that. So it's something that I have been kind of noticing and taking, notes on and practicing myself ever since I was like a preteen. And when I was in high school, I really started kind of trying to take books by my favorite authors and figure out, like, what do I like about the way that this book is written? And I would go through and I would, as I read a book, I would be like, oh, wow, I just, I noticed how this author made this metaphor and how she made it more powerful by making a metaphor that reflected the scene around them. If they're in a stable, making a metaphor that has to do with stables and stuff like that. And so there were a lot of things like that I really tried as I was growing up to kind of unpick what made the beautiful writing that I loved and was drawn to tick. So that's something that's still today, like when I'm reading a book and I'm like, whoa, this is written so beautifully. I'm always kind of trying to challenge myself to figure out, like, what makes it so beautiful. And for instance, right now, one thing I've noticed lately, a lot of books that I found really beautiful that have this prose quality that's very spare. It's not very wordy and it's not very long, but it's very lyrical. And that's something that I feel like I am not. I'm very verbose, and so I'm not very good at that. And so that's something right now that I'm trying to, like, figure out, how do you do that? How do you make something be both spare and lyrical? So I'm always kind of trying to, like, figure out what makes the writing that I love tick. And I also have practiced, because that's something I've been interested in for so long. I spent a lot of time practicing to try to figure out how to bring those qualities to my work. And I feel like the further I've gone as a writer, the more I have been able to sort of, like, look at my own work and look at others' work and recognize, like, specific ideas and specific concepts that make it work. And so, like, these days, I feel like I have actually taught classes in descriptive writing, and I have, kind of like principles of good descriptive writing. But for a long time, it was just, reading books and trying to figure out how they made their writing sound really beautiful, and then try to copy that. I usually have a lot of my existing lyricism in my first drafts. In fact, with pretty much every book, like, I've actually had to cut stuff out because, like, my editor's notes will come back and she'll be like, this is great and I love it and it's so beautiful, and can you please go cut out some metaphors, because it's getting a little heavy on the metaphors now. So I would say, if anything, like, I over include the beautiful language in the first draft, and then have to kind of, like, pare back so it's not overwhelming the text. But I actually don't read my work aloud a whole ton until very late stages when I'm doing, like, proofreading right before it gets published. Partly because I'm almost always doing my work with a nebulizer in my mouth while I'm doing breathing treatment, so it just is not conducive for reading out loud. So I don't usually read out loud a ton, but the way that I write is very auditorily focused, and so I tend to really think through the sounds of what I'm writing as I write it. And I know this sounds, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's almost like I read it out loud. It's like I narrate it in my head, if that makes sense. Like, I narrate it as though, it's a book being narrated to me in my head as I write it. And I also, whenever I specifically want to describe something, like, this is what this person looked like, or this is what this place looked like, or this is what this felt like, I try to establish a habit of kind of, like, recognizing that my first thing that I do. Oh, whoa, something is going on my computer. I try to recognize that the first thing that I am going to go to put in there is probably not the best thing. And so I'll like, if I go, I'll like go ahead and type out like the first metaphor, the first description that I think of, but I usually kind of pause at my keyboard and think, is there a better way to say this? And if I can figure out a better way to say it, then I will, you know, go ahead and replace it. And if not, then I'll come back to that in future drafts and kind of interrogate like those descriptions and see if they're really pulling their weight as much as they could be. And sometimes like that's actually, sometimes if I know that there's something in the book that I want to describe and I want to describe it really well, that's what I'll do when I'm laying in bed trying to get to sleep. I'll just be like, okay, what are the ways that are a little, you know, different that I could, you know, describe this. And unfortunately, I mean, sometimes I forget the next day what I thought of, if I thought of something, but there's also ways that I've, you know, come upon things that way. So it's just kind of something that I feel like I'm always thinking about and always trying to be aware of. And then as I revise, I'm also, you know, really looking at the way my sentences are structured. A lot of commas come out on subsequent drafts and a lot more periods get inserted on subsequent drafts because I have a real long sentence problem. So it's kind of like at every point, I feel like I'm really looking for the things that make those descriptions and those lyrical turns of phrase and trying to make them as strong as I can. And then eventually pulling some out when my editor says there's too many. So.
Well, you do a great job of it because it never feels heavy-handed or over the top. It's like the perfect amount. It flows, and you know, as writers, like the whole. Well, one of the jobs is to make books flow. It's supposed to be like music. It's supposed to, you know, the waves, ebbs and flows, and it's perfect. So thank you for that. Another thing you do really amazingly, and I admire it, is your middle grade perspective. Being able to write like a 12-year-old would write, or think the things that they think, and to sort of dig deep into that period of time. This book has a lot to do with siblings and sibling relationships and rivalries. You talk about that itchy almost 13 rage, which I'm currently experiencing with my almost 13-year-old, and how growing up is the slowest process known to mankind, which it absolutely feels like at that age. How do you dive into that mentality? Is it I know for me, I feel like I'm still 12 years old, so I can access those feelings quickly because I'm still the nervous, awkward, everything that I used to be. I haven't really grown in that respect, so it's easy for me to access. How do you access those?
Hang on. Sorry, something keeps popping up and making noise. Yeah, that's actually, I feel like in a lot of ways, I feel like I haven't changed that much since I was like a preteen. And I feel like people are always asking like, why do I write middle grade specifically? And like, honestly, it's because I find those years just such a fascinating time from a developmental perspective. I feel like the preteen years, kind of between like 9 and 13, are when you are not a kid anymore, but you're also not a teenager really, and you aren't really in the little kid world anymore, and you also aren't in the like high school, you know, dating, like that kind of space yet. And so I find that really interesting because I think there's a lot of inherent tension in those years between who you used to be and who you are becoming, but you aren't yet. And so there's kind of like that feeling, I think, in all of my books. I know I have frequently felt like all conflicts that happened between me and my parents growing up were because when I was 4, I remember this very clearly. When I was 4, I decided I was now a grown up and I expected to be treated as such. And I mean, that's just like the story of all of my parental issues from then until the time I was like 19. And so that was, you know, very much like how I felt as a preteen. I felt like I wasn't being taken seriously. And like I had big ideas, I had big dreams, and I felt like I was really mature, and I wanted to be seen as somebody who was kind of grown up and could engage with things in a grown up way. But obviously I wasn't. And I look back at that as an adult and I'm like, oh, honey, like, a woman is not grown up, no matter how you may feel. But that's how I felt when I was that age. And so that is kind of something that Ivy struggles with too. And a lot of this book is sort of about that being on that threshold of kind of becoming a teenager, but you're not a teenager yet. And going, Ivy is kind of like going through puberty and just feeling so much, like she has so much emotion inside her and she doesn't know what to do with it. And she's not always in control of it. And that was really, a huge part of my experience of those preteen and early teen years, is that I just felt like I had a lot of feelings and like sometimes a lot of anger. And I feel like I've kind of always been like an inherently kind of angry girl. Like I was passionate about things. I wanted to be taken seriously. And, when I wasn't, then I felt really angry and I felt so much frustration about it. And that is something that I wanted to kind of capture in that book, that because I think that we don't have a lot of room in media in general, and particularly like in middle grade books, we just don't have a lot of room for like just anger that doesn't have anything to do with anything. And with, particularly in particular, girls are not really allowed to be angry characters a lot of the time, particularly if they're just sort of struggling with anger without necessarily having like a righteous cause to be angry about. And so I wanted to show that like, this is how some people, like some girls feel like this and some boys feel like this too, and that's okay. Like, it's okay if you don't always feel in control, that's a normal part of life, and that you can still, be a good character and you can still be worth seeing on the page, even if you're feeling so like you're angry. And I find that a lot of the time, I think that adults really dislike characters who are angry or who are breaking the rules, because they feel like they're annoying or they feel like they're, setting a bad example. But kids love them. Kids really, I think kids have a very finely tuned meter to what is a authentic portrayal of the child experience, and they really resonate with characters that feel authentic to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. One of the other things I know you like to do in your books, in particular with this book, Ivy struggles with asthma. I know that portraying illnesses with accuracy and empathy is really important to you. What can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so that was something that I that was a part of the book from the very beginning. I really wanted to write a book about a kid who had a chronic illness that wasn't about the chronic illness. And I wanted it to be a part of the story, but not like the focus of the story. And I very intentionally, Ivy's asthma plays various roles throughout the story. And at the beginning, it plays a fairly big role. But I intentionally did not make asthma a part of the climax of the story, because I wanted it to be clear that it didn't exist to like bolster Ivy's character arc. It didn't exist to make her grow or make her change. It wasn't something she had to kind of come to terms with or anything like that. I just wanted it to be there and to just be like one of the things that made Ivy who she is. And it's something that I ended up choosing asthma for what I wanted Ivy to have. Partly because I also have severe asthma and cystic fibrosis. And so it was something that I was familiar with, and that even though it's funny because like, even though there's a lot of depictions of asthma in fiction, they're usually like fairly dumb. Like a lot of them are just really, really inaccurate. And often they can be really hurtful. And I always feel like one of I feel like you almost always see characters who have asthma who are like really anxious and really awkward, and asthma like functions as a metaphor for their social anxiety. And so they're like always like puffing on the inhaler to the point that it would probably put them in the actual emergency room because they've used it too many times. And they're always puffing on the inhaler every time they get nervous. And then at the end, they have this moment where it's like they get confident and they throw the inhaler away because they don't need that thing anymore. So it's like a crutch to their self-image and their sense of self. And that just always, like, every time I, see something like that, I'm always like want to shout at the TV or the book or whatever, like, that's not how lungs work. Like, bodies literally do not work like that. And so I wanted to kind of like create a representation in this book that showed that, asthma, which is really like super, super common, that there's like, I think 6 million children in the world or in the United States that have asthma, that like the 6 million children in the world who have asthma, they are not all awkward, bumbling people who just need to get confidence to throw away the asthma inhaler. They, play sports, they have adventures, they have very diverse personalities. And I wanted to show that Ivy is a character who is naturally very confident, who is able to go have cool fantasy adventures, and have her, her own story, even though she has asthma. And even though at times in the story, it plays a big role in her experiences.
I love that. It's reminding me right now. I don't know if anybody watches. I don't even know what the name of the show. It's the one with Simon Cowell and the Golden Buzzer. But they just had a girl on that she got the Golden Buzzer, but she's currently struggling with cancer and she's got like a 2% chance to live. But one of the things she said was, "I'm so much more than the bad things that happened to me." And that just reminds me of what you're saying, just because you're struggling with one thing doesn't mean that is the entire, focus of your existence.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, none of us want to be defined only by one aspect of who we are. And that, unfortunately, many media portrayals, that's kind of how they work.
Yeah. Let's try to get into, I know we're getting late, but we could talk forever here.
I know.
One of the themes, we could really talk forever. No joke, might be here all night, people. One of the themes that you touch on in the book, and this is one of my favorite themes too, is the sense of home or the sense of place, putting down roots or blooming where you're planted. And with Ivy, we know that she is looking to plant deep roots. But is struggling with a life where she can't, and she wants simple things. It's not that she wants this, amazing, huge house. She wants, this relationship with her aunt. She wants a pet. She wants friends that stay in her life, simple things. And I love the nuance how you tackled that topic and sort of all the, how home is where your heart is and where your family is, but we're also kind of built, many of us, that pining for a sense of home or a sense of place. I know I grew up in the Northeast, so a winter without 45 feet of snow is foreign to me. I don't think I could ever do that, or these bright sparkling falls that you had in your book. I felt like I was living in New York. And I know for you, you love the Carolinas and the beach, and that sense of place is meaningful to you. How do you tackle topics like that where it's, there isn't one answer. It's not either or, it's both and.
I feel like always, like, so, as an author, that one of the things that authors often talk about and are taught about are like story goals, that your main character has to have a goal in their story. And then, they have the goal at the beginning, and in the end, they can either get the goal or not get the goal. And I always feel like I'm a very mean author because I love for my character to have goals that they don't achieve by the end. Like in each of my books, the character does not fully achieve their goals by the end. And that's something that, like, sometimes, like, I've had readers be like, but why? Like, shouldn't it be a happy ending, But I really am drawn to the idea, like the thematic idea that even if we don't get what we think we need to be happy, that we can find other sources of happiness. And that's something that it kind of plays through all of my books that I've ever written, because that's something that's, you know, a really big theme in my life. Like there's times where I've thought I needed XYZ to be happy, and that thing never happened. And so then I had to figure out, okay, if I don't ever get XYZ, then how can I be happy? And I think that that's something that happens to everyone at a certain point. I think that's like a universal human experience. And that's one of the reasons that I like to explore that in my books. And so a lot of this stuff about home came from there. And I, you know, you mentioned that I love North Carolina. So I grew up in North Carolina, and it is, I always say it's the home of my heart, because it is a place that is just like deeply, deeply connected to me, and I think always will be. And even though I now actually have, you know, I haven't lived in North Carolina for like 13 years now, but it's still somewhere that's really, really a part of who I am. And I, for many years, actually tried to move to North Carolina, and it kind of did not work out in a cosmic, the universe does not want you to live here way. And I have since, you know, moved to Oregon, and I really like it here as well too. But so like, even though my experiences are different than Ivy, like I have definitely had that experience of like, I think that this is the thing that I need to feel like I'm at home, while I was living in various different places that did not really feel like home to me. And I had to kind of come to a place where I could recognize that home, that even though I will always have that craving, and even though I will always have that, you know, every time I go to visit, it feels like my soul is, you know, taking a deep breath. Even though that's a part of me, like there's more to the definition of home than the place. Even if it's a really special place, even if it's a place that is very, you know, tied deeply into who I am, there are more aspects to what makes home, you know, home for me. And so a lot of that kind of came out in Ivy's story. And I think that is, again, kind of another universal experience. I think that, you know, a lot of people kind of struggle with the feeling of home, even people who don't move around, you know, their entire lives. I think, you know, people sometimes feel like they don't feel like they have a home where they are because the climate is not, you know, something that is comfortable, or the people around them are, you know, different, and they have a hard time feeling like they fit in. I think that a lot of us kind of have seasons in life where we don't really feel like we fit into our home, and like there's something else that we need to be happy. And so that's, I think, kind of, even though Ivy's story is specifically fairly unique because most people don't live on the road for 12 years, that longing for a place to put down roots and feeling like you're struggling with that, I think that's something most people experience.
The way that you kind of talk about the both and, you know, like and how, you know, life doesn't have easy answers. There's no easy, or there probably shouldn't be easy answers in writing. That even carries into the magic in this book, which I thought was pretty poignant. The wishes that people can wish for, they all have rules, like you had mentioned before in your reading earlier. So they have to be earned, or at least sacrificed for. They have to be treated with respect and honor. We tend to wish for things out of a sense of loss, right? I feel like I don't have this, so I'm wishing for this, whether it's a dream to write, or whether it's, you know, for a home. And a lot of what you touch on is how to wish for things rightly. And I thought, I don't know if you can tell us about, you know, any ideas about how to wish rightly, and I don't expect you to, because it's a grandiose question. But it's one of the themes in the book, and I hope everyone picks it up, because it's one of many different themes in the book that were so poignant and so true to life. And even in a book that uses magic and is very fantastical in one sense, it was so very true in the writing, true to life, and almost not magical, you know, like it makes complete sense. And another thing you touched on too, and then if you want to ask questions, now is probably the time, because we're a little bit after 9 now, and I don't want to keep people here forever. So ask your questions now, and we'll get to them in a second. So whether you want to talk about wishing for things rightly, or if you want one of the other themes that you had touched on was ways of noticing the world, and how it's important to see the magic beneath the world, whether it's real magic or not, and not explaining away the unexplainable things in life. So whether you want to talk about the wishes and wishing rightly, or how we can be better noticers of the world, I'll let you take your pick.
Yeah, well, let's see how long it takes me to answer one, and then maybe I can get to both. The wishing one, like, that is one of my favorite things to explore in the book, and it actually kind of was one of those things that I didn't plan to talk as much about, but as I was writing the book, I kind of got to this point where I was like, okay, these star women, they can turn fireflies into magical wishes, and if they can turn fireflies into magical wishes, and it's a fairly unlimited ability as long as they can find fireflies, like, what is going to stop them from solving all of their problems this way? Like, I had to figure out, within the world building, like, there has to be a pretty strong reason why they wouldn't just use wishes to solve all of the problems in the plot as they arose. And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought about this idea that, like, even if you had access to magic, even if you had the ability to just wish something away or wish something into existence, like, what would be the reasons that you would be prevented from doing that, either by magic or, by just the nature of how wishes work and how they come out of us. And so I kind of came up with this, there's this theme throughout the book that talks about how, even though the star women have this ability to create wishes, that they themselves can't use too many. And at one point in the book, it also talks about how Ivy's mama sells wishes along the road as she goes, but neither of her sisters really barters wishes anymore, because both of them are settled in places where they have lived for a long time, and it just kind of gets too tricky when you're in one place with the same neighbors to continually barter wishes. But kind of the idea that I came to as I was kind of exploring these themes is the idea that when you wish for something, if you use like a quick and easy fix too much, then it takes something away from who you are fundamentally. And there's, at the beginning of the book, Mama tells Ivy a story about a long ago star woman who all star women learn about, who she tried to use wishes to solve all of the problems of human life. And she ended up, essentially becoming like a shell of herself, that she was somebody, it kind of took everything that was important from her and everything that made her who she was. And I think that is something that's really, really kind of true. I think, most of us don't have like magical solutions to our problems, but I was talking about this recently at my last launch with an author friend who, her name is Jamie Pecton, and her second book is called Lucky Girl, and it's about a girl who wins the lottery. And she pointed out that that's actually kind of what her book is sort of about, the real life connotations of that people who win the lottery are not always happier and are often less happy than they were before they won the lottery, because having access to this tremendous influx of money is something that can really change the way that you interact with yourself and interact with others. And sometimes when you have access to, be able to kind of throw money at whatever you need to, it sort of takes something from who you are. And so I thought that was really interesting, because I hadn't really thought of like the real life correlations, but I think that that's true. I think there's a lot of like research into happiness that shows that, past the point of financial stability, that more and more and more money doesn't result in more and more and more happiness, because once you are at the point where you're financially stable and you can care for your needs and care for some of your wants as well, then being able to solve problems without effort on your part is not necessarily like it's not necessarily something that ends up making you happier. And I think that that's kind of what I was thinking about when I wrote those passages about how being able to solve too many of our problems by wishing takes away who we are. Because I think a lot of who we become as people, that is earned in the struggle, in the learning experiences of our lives, in the moments that are hard and the moments where we have to really like take a stand and figure out who we are. And being able to kind of gloss over all of those would rob us of a lot.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think as human beings, you know, for whatever reason, happiness is pretty elusive. You know, you have those glimmers in those moments, but the benchmark always moves. You know, you see we see it all the time in writing. You know, like especially author. Yes, the dreams come true, but then all of a sudden you're like, oh, what's a star review? Oh, what's a book trailer? Oh, and you know, like the benchmark is always moving, and the challenge as a human being, no matter what situation you find yourself in, is finding joy wherever you are, and striving for it to be enough.
Yes, exactly. I could not have said that better. Yeah,
okay. Well. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, what were you gonna say?
No, I was gonna transition, but if you have anything more to say,
nope. I was actually just gonna say let's do some questions from the audience. So
yes, okay.
On the same.
So I'm gonna try this, friends. We'll see if I can handle it. All right. Sarah's asking, I want to know if there's any story behind what you chose to name your characters. Oh, I like this question.
Yeah. So I always like love to come up with like naming characters is one of my favorite things because I just really like names. Like, and I always have. I remember being like 10 years old and asking my mom to please buy me a book of baby names because I just like reading it.
So many.
Yeah, it just was cool. Like I had no real reason, but I liked them. And so I always love naming my characters, and I always feel like I have to I have to find the name that feels right for my main characters. And so I kind of early on hit on the name Ivy for this character. It just felt really, really great. And I liked the idea of Bloom as a last name for this family. It felt like a little bit kind of quirky, a little bit off the beaten path to go along with this RV traveling family. And I just decided, I was like, at first I was like, do I want Ivy and Bloom in the same name? Like, I'm just going to go with it. And, we'll just go like lean fully into this plant thing. And so that was kind of like her name. And then early in the drafting, I decided that I spontaneously decided that her dad was going to be from Alabama, and I wanted him to call her by two names, by her first and middle name. And so I was like, trying to pair middle names with Ivy, and I was like, May sounds really nice, Ivy May. And then I was like, Ivy May Bloom sounds like a sentence. And I also just sort of decided to lean into that. And then it became like this really cool metaphor that because her name is Ivy May Bloom, like she really hates her name at the beginning, and she feels like her parents have kind of cursed her because they, they have given her this name that sounds like a question, like, Ivy May Bloom, and she feels like she can't bloom because she doesn't have anywhere to put down her roots. And so it became kind of like this really, really cool device to play with throughout the book, that she has all these feelings about her name and what it means. So yeah, that was kind of like the most significant story. The other kind of interesting story with names specifically is that for the whole, up until I was doing edits with my editor, so for many drafts of the book, the youngest sister in the family was named Lulu. And then my editor felt like there was a character named Lydia and there was a character named Lulu, and she felt like they were maybe too close and like people might end up getting confused. And we had both sort of agreed that Lydia needed to stay, that like it was the perfect name for that character. And so I had to rename Lulu, but Lulu was like this very strong personality. She's like the youngest sister, and she's like a certifiable genius, and she's extremely annoying. And so I wanted like a name that really like kind of encapsulated like the fact that she's like really young, and she's really, she's like, a unique character, a one in a kind character. And anyway, so I actually I had made a list of names that I was trying to, figure out, and I had sent some to my editor, and I think at least 3 different times I did like a find replace through my whole document, like changing this character's name. And so like for a while she was this name, and for a while she was this name. And I didn't love any of them, you know, and then I asked on Facebook for recommendations. I was like, can anybody give me ideas for like a precocious, genius, but annoying younger sister, you know? And I got like dozens and dozens of recommendations, and Sophie was one of them. And I was like, Sophie, that feels right for the character. So now the youngest daughter's name is Sophie, and I think it fits her very well.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Naming characters, I think, is probably my favorite part in any book. And it has to be the right name. It has to feel right.
Totally.
Because they become a person in
Exactly.
your mind. Like they are. And names are just evocative. They bring out emotions. And, you know, if you ever knew somebody by the name of Jacob and he was a jerk, every Jacob to you is going to be a jerk. You know? So like, it's a very important. Very important. All right. Cindy, do you think you'll write for a different audience someday? Picture books or YA?
That's, you know, kind of a funny question, because actually before I wrote Where the Watermelons Grow, I had never written a middle grade. And so, you know, over the course of the books that I've written, middle grade is actually still kind of a new space for me. And I will be honest and say, I don't know right now. Middle grade, I always, when I, you know, got a contract for publishing middle grade, I always thought eventually I would go back to doing YA as well. But like, quite honestly, the more I write middle grade, the more I want to write middle grade. And the more like I write in this space, the more I love it. And the less of a drive that I necessarily feel to like go back to YA. Also, like, YA has so much more drama than middle grade. And so there's like, you know, there's a decent part of me that's like, I'm good. I'm just gonna like stay here with awkward middle grade people and call it good.
We hang out in the clubhouse and eat our snacks together. And
exactly. And so I don't know. I would love to, you know, branch out ultimately. I ultimately think I'll branch out to other age categories. I just feel like right now I'm kind of like playing around with different things and trying to figure out where I want to go. So the only one I don't know that I would branch out into adult necessarily, at least not in fiction, largely because like we were talking about earlier, I still feel like I have the brain of a middle grader, and I realize I am a legitimate adult who's had many legitimate adult experiences at this point, but I just am like, I don't know how to write for adults. Like,
yeah,
adults mystify me.
Yeah, and I think every middle grade writer will say, like, writing middle grade, it's the one genre where hope is always the end of the story. Like,
absolutely.
And once you get addicted to that, you just can't, like, I can't imagine writing something that ended bleakly. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. There's something really special about middle grade. It is really just a lovely place to write.
Absolutely. Agreed. Okay. Last question, unless anyone pops in. What was the first book you loved growing up?
The first book I loved. I know you're going to appreciate this, Cory. I would have to say that probably the first book that I ever like really remember loving was Anne of Green Gables. And that's right. Yep. I
brought it.
That's right. Yes. I've got a copy too. I don't even know when, like, or how this got started. Probably I just was like, I was terrible at going to sleep all through my childhood. And I don't know what age I was, but I have this very distinct memory that my mom had these audiobook cassettes that were Megan Follows, who played Anne of Green Gables in the one true adaptation.
The one true.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan Follows actually narrated condensed versions of all of the books in the Anne of Green Gables series. And we had the audio. Yeah, unfortunately they're abridged, and she never did like unabridged ones, which I wish so much as an adult that I had. But so we owned the cassettes for Anne of Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea. And at one point, probably because she was desperate to make me stay in bed, my mom started putting me to sleep and turning on one of those books on the tape player while I was falling asleep. And so like I have these memories, these vivid memories of being a kid and just listening to Megan Follow's voice as I was getting tired and sleepy. I'm sure I was like 5, like I was quite young. And so I was really too young, like to understand or appreciate, any of Ella Montgomery's wonderful attributes, but I loved Megan Follow's voice, and I loved Anne as a character. I, from very early age, was very impetuous and very emotional, and so I really recognized myself in her, and I loved all the funny, weird experiences that she has and all the weird ways she gets into trouble. And so that's like the first book that I remember really, really loving and becoming emotionally attached to.
Well, I think all those listening hours worked in the end, because it's in your blood now and it comes out in your writing. And if there's anybody that can do a follow-up to an Ella Montgomery setting, it would definitely be Cindy Baldwin.
Well, thank you. That's a high compliment I'm not sure I deserve.
No, definitely deserved. I guess we'll just do one last little thing. We were just going to do one fun thing. We brought our Anne of Green Gables because we both are lovers. And I was just going to have Cindy pick a page 1 through, let's see, mine has 71 pages. And if you give me a page, I will read the first line of dialogue that I find, and we'll see if it has anything interesting to say.
Okay, let's do 182.
182. Oh, well, that one's... Oh, I'll give you the second line of dialogue. It says, "Don't interfere then."
Oh, wow.
So I don't know how you want to take that one, but if it's any sort of fortune, watch your interference.
Seriously, everybody, you've heard the fortune for the night. Well, Cory, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was wonderful, and we could have gone on for hours.
For hours. It was my absolute pleasure. Like I said, could listen to you forever.
Well, right back at you. And really, everyone, if you have not yet read Cory's books, like, they are truly some of my favorite middle grade novels of all time.
That's a high compliment.
Well, I don't want to interfere. With the love
you're not interfering.
Well, I don't know. Anne of Green Gables told me not to, but it is about time. And, so it is my job to kind of come in and close out. I know I have the lighting obviously changed since I was last on camera, so I apologize for my very striped face right now. But thank you both for joining us. It was a wonderful conversation. Cindy, I really enjoyed all you had to say about, especially representing chronic illness in children's books. I thought that was really wonderful, and I loved your take on it, and find it to be very important as a way of thinking about those things, especially kind of for books, for your audiences all the way through. But I think that's really important. So thank you both for everything. Everyone, please have a lovely Friday night. Have a wonderful weekend. Recover from whatever has been going on for the week. And that is our event. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everyone. We love you.
Yep.
Thank you. Yes, and so you both know, the comments are available as part of the replay as well. So if you didn't get a chance to read any of the comments that were coming in as you were talking, there's just some wonderful, wonderful sharing joy there that you are welcome to revisit at your leisure. But thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a